Good morning, everybody. While we're gathering, we're gonna start at 10:15 on the dot because we filmed this class. So this is something to tell you all. If you're out of town, we've got ways of staying connected now, in ways that we never had before. So if you're ever traveling or you're not here on a Sunday morning, you can watch this. This class will be on live stream beginning at 10:15. They're probably streaming it now. Live stream while we're getting warmed up. But you can also watch it later in the day on the YouTube channel. If you've got a pad and your pen, you can write down St. Luke's Beeham, one word, SAINTLUKES Beeham, St. Luke's Beeham. That's our YouTube channel. So this class will be on the YouTube channel. If perhaps you left here and you thought, well, that's a lot of material. Maybe I missed something. You can always go back and watch it. And then also, this class is also a pre-recorded podcast that will be released in the morning at 7. Now, every time you get a midweek email from us, the e-dialogue, and if you're not on our email list, you can also write down your email and just leave it with me when you leave this class. But if you get a midweek email from us, on that is a link. You can subscribe with Kate Clinton, hit that link, and she'll make sure that you get podcast notifications and also the link to the YouTube channel, so you don't even have to look for it. You can just hit it and pop, this class comes right up. So you never, ever have to miss this class. Also, if you want to attend, say, the Travelers class upstairs and study the Gospel of Mark, you don't have to miss this class. We've got lots and lots of ways for you to see this. So I'm really tickled with how technology is keeping us together. One thing I want you to sort of tease your imagination is to say that we never have an opportunity. I mean, we never have to miss church anymore. I mean, that's one silver lining from this disruption. Speaking of the pandemic disruption, this is the first time I've taught you guys in person on a Sunday morning since March 2020. Right? That's poignant. And I was just telling some friends a minute ago, I'll never forget the summer and fall. None of us ever forget 2020, of course. The summer and fall of 2020, our building was closed. And, of course, we were blessed with the pavilion that we built in 2018, wondering what in the world we would do with it, right? And it ended up being our lifeline. It kept us going. Although, does anybody remember that was the coldest winter everybody could remember? I used to say, let's just worship outside. Winters are mild here. It was like Christmas at Valley Forge. And, right? And it was free. I remember when the snow was blowing in, someone said, isn't that pretty? Not if you've been outside for 6 hours. It's not pretty at all. But anyway, the building, if you remember the building, we didn't know what to do in those days. And so the facility guys would walk around with electrostatic spray and would kind of spray it down. And I was the only person in the building most days of the week. So I was like the little boy in The Shining on the big wheel that rides up and down the hall, right? I just didn't see any twins upstairs, but it was just sad. And then the Sunday school rooms were empty, as if the children were coming back next week. I mean, all their stuff was out, crayons and then name tags and Valentine's Day stuff in the hall. It reminded me of Chernobyl or something. It was very disrupted and sad. And I wondered, I just want y'all to know, I wondered and I fretted and I wondered if we would ever get it back again. Well, we did. God is faithful, and not only are we back, we're different, bigger, really, better, certainly younger, but much of what we lost, we've gained, and then even more fold. That's God's blessing, right? I mean, we just have an abundance of stuff. We emerged on the other side of the disruption with a restaurant and a television station, and some ways to stay connected, and just lots and lots of ways to do church in a creative way that we would have probably never dreamed of before. And so this Sunday school class, or this podcast class, is sort of a new way of doing what we used to do. Remember, we used to do Jericho Road right after breakfast, and everybody was around tables and all. Well, now we have breakfast all morning, so I want y'all to feel free to get something to eat, bring it in. That's why we sort of give everybody a minute to get settled in, just grab some food. And we've got food all day now. Before the pandemic disruption, we did what most churches do. We would have, thank you so much, Jason. We would have breakfast, in a fixed amount of time. And if you didn't make that amount of time, you didn't make breakfast, right? If you had one slow child, no one got to eat, right? And so now you can have, you take home a burrito if you want to. I mean, we've got food all morning. So that's another silver lining that came. But I used to miss teaching y'all like this. I never thought we'd see it again. A little different configuration because we've still got the Word. We're not around tables and chairs, but I hope you're going to have a lot of fun. Somebody asked me about videos. Remember, I used to always end Jericho Road with a foreign commercial. I was addicted to foreign commercials. I can't show those because we film now, and we don't have a copyright for whatever rule there. So I'll think of, if I find a foreign commercial, I'll just send it to you during the week, and we can still, and y'all send them to me too if you find any that you like. There was a really cool BMW commercial. Did y'all see this one with the retired CEO of Mercedes? So the CEO of Mercedes-Benz retired after, I don't know, 40 years or something, and it was a tribute to him. Like they were competition, but they really admired him, and he was shaking hands and saying goodbye, and had a farewell party and a cake and all that stuff. And he goes back home and he gets in a BMW and drives off. It says, "Free at last." So anyway, all right. So we've got 5 more minutes. I think we're sort of making this up as we go along. So now that I know that it doesn't take us that much time to turn this around, next week I'll start it closer to 10:10. Jay, we'll just make a note, start at 10:10. 10:15 is too much. We didn't know if we'd have enough time to flip all this and for you all to get settled. And is there any way to text Henry and let him know we could go and get started? Can we get started? Are we ready? Are y'all like filming me now? So I'm just so I don't have to wait. I don't have to waste any more time. Welcome to Jericho Road. Welcome back to a class that I'm calling Living Water. And let's have a prayer before we get started. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this return. Thank you so much for these friends. Thank you so much for your Spirit poured upon us. I pray that you give us ears to hear you. I pray that we encounter the Bible in a new way. And all these things we lift up in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so what are we going to do this year? We're calling it Living Water. I think my task this morning is to teach you a little bit of a method of reading Scripture in this class, a method, and then we're going to look at a couple of Bible stories and see if we can't see them through the lens of water. I am fond of saying that most Christians want to read the Bible. Maybe we think we should read the Bible, but the Bible can be hard to read, except for the familiar verses or the familiar stories that we perhaps know from Sunday school. And perhaps these are just stories about Jesus, but I know that much of the Old Testament, or what I will begin to train us to call the Hebrew Scriptures, those can be just bizarre, right? You're just like, what am I reading? I mean, gosh, we'll read something on a Sunday morning, and I'll hear the congregation go, "The word of the Lord, thanks be to God." Like, whatever it was. So as a result, what we do is we kind of we go with what we know. We stick with the familiar stuff, but then 1,000 pages goes unread and unloved. So what I'm going to do in this next fall is to use the backdrop of water, or the lack of it, so that we can re-engage stories that we already know and also meet some new people and hopefully make all of it incredibly relevant and important for today. But why water? So I'm a big fan of a concept called market myopia, which is a mouthful. I know market myopia sounds like a lot. Okay, I've already lost something. Oh no, here it is. It sounds like a lot, but it's not really. Car dealerships love market myopia. In other words, once you buy your car, you see your car everywhere. That's what that means, right? You buy a silver 4-door sedan, you go, "Oh, there's my car." You didn't see it before, right? But once you see it, you can't unsee it. What I hope to do, beginning with class 1, is to say, once we say water, or water in the Bible, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. Okay, it's everywhere. I'll give you an example. Psalm 42, verse 1, "As the deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for you, O God, for the living God." We see, now that I say water, you can see the water all in that, right? The flowing streams and the thirsting for God. We're gonna start seeing water everywhere, and we're gonna start seeing the Bible through the lens of water, or the lack of it. So I'll begin with something that every 5th grader in Alabama knows. Every 5th grade learns this. This is the Great Seal of our state, and on the Great Seal of Alabama contains all the navigable rivers. Alabama has more navigable water than any other state in the Union, the lower 48, except for California. And California is much bigger than we are. So every child knows we've got lots of water, and water's everywhere. The Mobile watershed begins just north of the city and flows northward into three states. 3 states depend on the Mobile watershed. There are more freshwater snails and more biodiversity than any other watershed in America. It's right. So Alabama has an abundance of water, and we're really blessed about it. I'm trying to say that we don't really have to think about water all that much. Did anybody think about water yesterday? Okay, that was the nastiest day of the year. It wasn't the hottest, but it was just like wet, hot, wet, hot, wet, hot, right? So we live in a very wet, usually wet world. But a lot of people do think about water. Lake Mead, Colorado River. According to the WHO, 2 billion people live in water-stressed places. And, of course, the southwestern part of the United States is one of these. This list also includes the land of the Bible. It's a water-stressed environment. So this is another reason why we're going to talk about water as a lens through which we see Scripture. Then as now, people living in the world of Jesus thought about water all the time, or the lack of it. Now, you'll hear me in this class talk about my pal Edan a lot. Edan is an Israeli friend who many of you have met on trips, and I'd love for all of you to put that on your bucket list to go to Israel with me, because what makes it special, and even if you've been with another group, you might want to consider returning with us, is that Edan is my buddy. And he's an archaeologist and fascinating. It's almost like having your own personal walking tour everywhere you go. And so I'll reference him a lot because we've been together a bunch in the last 10 years, and we've been talking about this class in water. But as of today, or in Israel today, I'll just give you an example of their world. Edan saves his children's bath water in order to irrigate his garden. See, water's that holy and precious. I mean, not only does he consider it, and that's something, by the way, people living in Nevada are probably going to have to start doing, right, because of the Colorado River. But Edan also considers that to be a holy task because water is precious that way. It's a gift. People living in Israel are well aware that the government spends a lot of money on the desalination of seawater and also the repurposing of sewage water from every city to green the desert. So all the sewage goes into the desert for irrigation. And they talk about water, they think about water. And the same thing happened in the time of the Bible and in the biblical time as well. In the land of the Bible, people had access to water in the following ways. Cisterns would collect rainwater, mostly over the winter months. So everyone had access to a cistern. Every city had a cistern. Every structure had some sort of cistern on it. But that water got skunky. It's hard to store water. There's a reason, by the way, now, while we're talking about water, why people would drink wine during their meals, right? Because you can store wine. You can keep wine. Water in a clay jar is not going to stay good for very long. So see, now we're beginning to sort of learn maybe that water is everywhere or on their minds when you start thinking of the stories that you know. The best water was fresh water if you could get it. And so this would be from a spring or a well or a river or fresh rain. And the Bible has a word for it. They call it living water, which is the title of this class, Living Water. One of the characters that we're going to meet later is the prophet Ezekiel, who, among other things, dreamed of the temple being restored. I'll give you the backstory on Ezekiel. 600 years before Jesus' birth, God's people lost everything. They didn't think they would lose everything, but the prophets warned them, you're going to lose this, you're going to lose this, you're going to leave the cover of God's protection if you don't do right. And they didn't do right. And so 600 years before Jesus' birth, the Babylonian army surrounded their city and tore down the temple and took them far away to a faraway land, which is what the Babylonians did. That's how they subjugated peoples. And they thought they'd lost everything because they lost the house where God lived. They thought they were absolutely without God out there, which was sort of the point. The Babylonians wanted to create kind of a one world order with all the jumbled up peoples. And so the Hebrews, who had always been different and always been unique, wondered if they were going to lose everything out there. And then God called a prophet way out in Babylon, Ezekiel, which makes Ezekiel important for that, if not only for what he said, but for who he was. In other words, God called a prophet way out there in Babylon, not merely in Jerusalem, not merely within the Holy Land. Way out there in Babylon, they ceased to become monolatrist, which means that I'm loyal to my God, but you might have your God, but hopefully my God can beat up your God. And they became monotheist, which means that God is over all, because he called a prophet way out there. And Ezekiel, in the book of Ezekiel, he had a dream that the temple would be restored, that they would get it back. Which is what they ever wanted, right? But when Ezekiel dreamed of the temple coming back, the temple, and I'll tell you more about the temple in a minute, the temple being God's house, when he dreamed of it coming back or being rebuilt again, he didn't dream of silver and gold. Rather, he dreamed of water. It's the most valuable thing they could think of. All right, so this is, oh, no. Oh, I don't have the scriptures not on here. Oh, great. See, we're practicing. Now I know. All right, everybody get a Bible. I want you to turn with me to Ezekiel 47, and it's page 714 if you've got the red Bible. If you've got another one, you're on your own. 714. Hey, I'm ready. 714. This is Ezekiel 47. We're going to read the first 6 verses. And feel free to come up and get a Bible off the cart if you need one. Okay, Ezekiel 47, verse 1 through 6. This is an angel showing Ezekiel the new temple when they get it back. Then he brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and there water was flowing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. And water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple south of the altar. And then he brought me out by the way of the north gate, and he led me around on the outside of the outer gate that faces toward the east. And water was coming out from the south side. And going on eastward with a cord in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits, and then led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. And then he measured 1,000, and he led me through the water, and it was knee deep. And again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was up to the waist. And again he measured 1,000. It was a river that I could not cross, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in, a river that could not be crossed. And he said to me, "Mortal, have you seen this? Splish, splash, water everywhere. No silver, no gold. Water, water, more water than you could imagine. And best yet, it would be their water." Now, in time, the temple would be rebuilt. This is also part of the drama of the story, right? 600 years before Jesus, they lost it. They thought they'd never get it back. But then 70 years later, they get to go home, which is something they never dreamed of. Comfort ye, my people, the prophet Isaiah would say. You're going to get it back. And they would rebuild the temple. And then by the time you get to the world of Jesus, that temple would be the wonder of the ancient world, thanks to King Herod, the wicked King Herod that we'll learn in later classes. He would rebuild it into a showplace. And greeting you when you got to the temple would be water. So this is the picture that I want to show you now. These are the steps of the Pool of Siloam. Pool of Siloam, which means sent. Now, my pal Edon likes to say it this way. If you're schlepping it to Jerusalem from the Galilee, the first thing you need to see when you enter into Jerusalem is water for washing. Pool of Siloam was a washing place so that you could clean your body, so that you could go up the hill and clean your soul as well. I'll show you a model from the Israel Museum, and this is what the Pool of Siloam would have looked like. Now, if you go back, you see those are just steps and some mud. There's a whole lot more to Siloam that we could uncover, but we can't uncover because it's in a neighborhood. And it's in a hotly contested neighborhood. And it's a neighborhood that didn't want you digging around in there and digging up under their house. And so what we've I haven't found anything. What my friends have found, including Edon, is the road that goes from, you see the little square? That's what the Pool of Siloam possibly could have looked like. They have now found the road that goes up to the Temple Mount, and it's underneath the neighborhood. So they've spent as much on the archway to not disturb the neighborhood as they have on the road itself, but it will be open to the public very, very, very soon. It's not open to the public yet, but it's basically a tunnel that goes all the way to the southern steps of the Temple Mount. So with my map, I spared no expense on this. With my map, I want to orient you. So this is north-south, okay, east-west. This is the Pool of Siloam. This is what you would see as you entered into the city, this large pool of water. Now remember, you live in a world that's water-stressed. So your big trip to Jerusalem is going to have water greeting you when you come to the city. Quick tutorial on how people worshiped in the world of Jesus. Let's say you're living in the Galilee. You would worship at the synagogue every Sabbath day. That's where you would study and you would pray and you would think about God. But you would worship God at least one time for every year of your life. Now, there were 3 festivals. If you could swing it, you'd make it to 3. But at least one, you would go to Passover in the spring, Pentecost 50 days later, or Sukkot in the fall. So that you have 3 opportunities to go. And so when you travel, say 5 days through some very, very hot, very, very dusty, very, very dry places, the first thing you would see is water. Okay, so that's the first thing that we want to remember is that water is what would thrill you when you reach there. And most scholars believe that at the fall festival, which is Sukkot, the one that would sort of end the year. They would pray for rain at the end of the festival, and on the last day of the festival, the priest would draw water from the pool of Siloam, and he would walk up this hill, and you can see that it's a hill, about 300 feet is the grade. He would walk up this hill to the altar in front of the temple, and he would pour that water over the temple, praying for rain over the winter so that they would survive another year, and he called that water living water. Okay, John chapter 7, FYI, you're making a note of this. John chapter 7, Jesus would stand right here, the last day of the festival, and say, I'm living water. Right? You begin to see how water matters now, water image. He says he's living water. I mean, he wasn't just finding a pretty phrase. He's saying, I'm the source, right? I'm the thing that's going to keep you alive. I'm the answer to your prayers. I'm your security. I'm your life. Okay, quick tutorial. Okay, I've told you about temple worship. Let me tell you about the Gospel of John, because we're going to do a little bit of a study in John in just a second. John's different than the first three Gospels. We're learning this in my midweek Bible study, by the way. You've got to know how John is different. The first three Gospels were written earlier than John. Mark's Gospel probably written around the year 70. Okay, John's Gospel written around the year 100, which is important to remember. That's 30 years later. I mean, first of all, take any book that was written 30 years ago, right? Hand a teenager a book written in 1992, and you've got to explain some things. Okay, what's a payphone? Right? What's a phone book? What's a record store? You know, right? I mean, what are these things? And so it's time conditioned. It has a different era in which it was written. That's the first reason why it's different. But the second reason why it's different is because John's gospel was written to a different audience. The first three gospels were written to mainly Hebrew-speaking or Hebrew-oriented people, I should say, people living in the world of Jesus with familiarity of the Hebrew religion. John's gospel was written to a Greek-speaking Roman reality, Roman world, and so they didn't have the same starting points, if you will. I mean, Passover, the first three gospels really center the story of Jesus through the lens of Passover. And what I mean by this is to say, a good analogy for this is the movie Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan is about a soldier, right, being rescued because his brothers died, but it's seen through the lens of D-Day. And so the first three Gospels are seen through the lens of the Passover. Jesus becomes the Passover lamb. The cross becomes the one sacrifice, right? Once and for all sacrifice. When I take groups to the Holy Land, we start in the Galilee and then we move to Jerusalem as if we were taking a pilgrimage to Jerusalem from that place for the festival of the Passover. But the Last Supper was a Passover meal. I mean, you can go on and on and on. The Passover is the shape, if you will, of the first three. John's gospel, written 30 years later, had to find a different starting point, and it's water. John takes the apostles' memories. Who wrote John, right? Well, the Gospel of John refers to John as the beloved disciple. I don't believe that John said that about himself. I believe that the Apostle John dictated everything he remembered about Jesus in great detail to a writer who called the Gospel John, living probably in Ephesus around the year 100. And so what he did is he listened to the stories of Jesus, remembering that Jesus would have traveled to Jerusalem at least one time in a year in his whole life, and he picked a different festival. He picked Sukkot, which has to do with water. Why water? Well, it's just accessible. Everybody understands water. Passover would be difficult for someone without knowledge of the Hebrew religion to understand, but water is universal. It's the perfect image. It's the perfect image because everybody needs it, and only God can make it. Now, okay, here's a little science for you. We can make water. Okay, it takes an explosion. Did y'all know that, right? So you have to break down the molecules with the hydrogen and the oxygen. If you could blow it up, you can make water. I'm told that on May 6, 1937, the Hindenburg not only blew up, it also made a lot of water when it did that. So you can make it, I guess, right? So when you say that people are sort of extracting water from clouds or desalinating seawater, they're really just repurposing something that God made. Crudely put, water evaporates from rivers, lakes, and oceans. That's what it does. These evaporate and then collects into clouds, and then it rains, and the process starts all over again, which is something only God can do. Water is the perfect image, right, for God. And also, if you think about evaporation and then rain coming back again, it also kind of feels a little like death and resurrection. So Jesus would call himself living water, which means that water is grace. But there's still more. If you've got a Bible, I want you to turn with me to Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14 is page 776. Zechariah is one of the later prophets. And what Zechariah did is Zechariah dreamed of the Messiah returning. The Jewish people always had the idea that a Messiah would come and save them. It's page 776, Zechariah 14. And if you're living in the world of Jesus, and you're worshiping in the temple, which, by the way, is also surrounded with the Roman soldiers that have conquered your land and tax your land and make you really, really sad because they own everything, right? And this agrarian religion of the Hebrews, now this land is owned by absentee landowners, and you're from the Galilee, and you're just barely... you don't have 2 shekels to rub together, okay? And you see the presence of these soldiers, and if anyone gives a whiff that the Messiah has returned, you're really glad about that, because you're going to have freedom again, and you're going to get these foreigners, out of your world, out of your land, out of your holy places, if you will. Jesus stood right here in John chapter 7 and said, "I am living water." Now, for us, right, for Christians living in Birmingham in 2022, that means God is our source of life. If you're a first century Jewish person living under the yoke of Rome, to say that you're living water means this. Zechariah 14, verse 8. On that day, living waters shall flow from Jerusalem. Okay, sounds like Ezekiel. Half of them to the eastern sea, half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer as in winter. And the Lord will become king over all the earth. And on that day, the Lord will be one, and his name will be one. And the Lord will become king. Oh my goodness, living water also means a king. See, and you best believe that's political and it's on their minds when Jesus calls himself living water. Are you starting to see how water's everywhere? I mean, it's everywhere. It unlocks so much more meaning than we ever knew. So now that I've trained you on the method, let's look at a Bible story that we all know through the lens of water, and it's John chapter 4. So it's on page 864 if you've got the red Bible, but John 4, that should be easy to find if you've got another. And let's look at the Samaritan woman at the well. John 4. Knowing what we know about water. Now, John 4, we're going to begin with the 3rd verse. So Jesus left Judea and started back to Galilee, but he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. The Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans." And Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Okay, wow, it's living water again. All right, let's think about what we know, what we've learned already, and now we can use this as a lens for a Bible study. Okay, fact, it's noon. It's hot. If you've ever been over there, it's just hot. It's just hot it's as hot as Montgomery all the time. All right, so it's just hot. It's noon. All right, it's noon the day. Okay, it's a well. As I mentioned to you, living water can come in fresh rain or springs or rivers or wells. But wells are the hardest way to get water because you have to use these heavy jars. And so you've got to have some arm strength, if you will, to draw that water. I read somewhere not too long ago that one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century was the washing machine. It was because washing was one of the most arduous tasks because it involved a lot of arm strength in carrying water. The carrying of water, the scrubbing, the drawing of water, and a lot of that, and of course it all fell on women, but a lot of this time was saved by the washing machine that had never been before. As a matter of fact, the whole concept of the weekend or holidays or vacations happened as a result of the washing machine because so much time now had been saved. And I would sadly say it was also saved to give, women something else to do, but to some other work. But it was the washing machine that really revolutionized the work week, if you will. It's an important invention. It has to do with water. Well, same thing with this well. This woman is at noon. It's noon at a well drawing water. A couple things are suspicious in this story. Sychar is a nearby town. It's got its own water source. It's got its own water. So she's going out to a well that's at a crossroads, which is outside of town, which means that she's an outcast. And she's drawing water at the hottest part of the day, which means that no one will help her. Also, she's an enemy. She's a Samaritan. Now, we're going to meet Samaritans at several parts of this fall. We're going to meet them in this class. But if you've got a pad and paper, I want you to write down this timeline, because this is going to help you locate people and stories and things. I'm going to take just a break and give you, from this story, and give you an orientation on Samaritans using the timeline. And look, everybody ought to have something like this in the back of their Bible at home, because it can help you you locate things, especially the Hebrew Scriptures when they get kind of chopped up and strange. A timeline can locate stuff. All right, so here, these are rough numbers, and you can kind of go back and forth in some of these general numbers, but it's close enough to get your mind around it. 2000 BC is the call of Abraham. It's 4,000 years ago. That's the call of Abraham to leave a city and go follow God and be different, and his dreams will come true. And his dream was to have a child and some land to give it to. And God would say that the stars above your head are your ancestor. Your progeny, rather, are as numerous as the stars above you. And, of course, we're those stars, right? So the story of us really begins with Genesis chapter 12, not Genesis chapter 1. 1 through 11 is prehistory, but Genesis 12 is 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, the call of Abraham. Okay, 1500 BC is the flight from Egypt, where God took a nation of slaves and did something for them that they could not do on their own, which is to save them from the hand of Pharaoh, and then to give them a promised land. So that's that origin story. And, of course, our communion words are Passover words, which is related to this story. So that's a very, very important story for us, because God liberates us from the chains of sin and death, right? So that's where that lands. 1000 BC is the story of King David. King David, that's 1000 BC. It was probably never better for the Hebrew people than King David. King David was the storied king, the psalmist, the boy with the slingshot, the boy who would become the mightiest, the mightiest of them, would have 12 unified tribes and a vast empire, and it probably just was never better for them than for King David. And most importantly, for the purposes of this class and our story, is he establishes a capital city in Jerusalem, which would be the city that many, the three Abrahamic faiths consider the most holy city on planet Earth. Okay, so that's 1000 BC. 900 BC simply means that by 100 years later, that dream has split in two. Sadly, God's dream for his people, which was to be different than all the nations of the earth and be together, they split into 10 tribes in the north and 2 tribes in the south, with the capital of Jerusalem. So this is where the Old Testament gets hard to read. So the northern tribes comprise the kingdom of Israel, and the southern tribes comprise the kingdom of Judah. And so when you see these words mixed up, you're thinking king of Judah, king of Israel. That simply means that somebody's the king in the north, somebody's the king of the south. So that happens in 900. So it splits. They're still related. I mean, they're still cousins. They're just not together in a unified country anymore, the two of them. Now I've got 2 specific dates at the bottom. 732 is the year that the Assyrians wiped the northern kingdom off the map, never to be found again. 586 at the very end is the destruction of the last of them, the Judean kingdom and Jerusalem, by the Babylonians. But we're going to go back to 732 for a second here. We don't know for sure what happened to those people, except we know that the Assyrians were not the Babylonians, and they didn't exile intact peoples. They just hit it like a bomb. They hit the nations that they took over like a bomb, and then like to tear up things. So we say that the kingdom of Israel disappeared forever. But of course there were people still living there. There were remnant people living there. And then also the Assyrians resettled the area with other countries that they had blown up like a bomb. And so they just mixed it all together. And then also you will learn in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 17, that they even took some local sort of Hebraic priests, if you will, to teach them the religion of the Hebrews. Those are the Samaritans. Displaced people. Sure, they've got some Hebrew blood in them, but with the Samaritans went so far as to say, we are the nation of Israel. We've continued to be the nation of Israel. We never disappeared. Here we are. Well, 2 Kings 17 doesn't say that. 2 Kings 17 says, no, you worship like Hebrews because the Assyrians taught you to. But you're displaced people from Syria and all the neighboring countries. And so there ain't no fight like a family fight. So then the Samaritan said, that's fine. We'll just read the first 5 books of the Bible because anything else in it doesn't say we exist. so we're just going to read the first 5. And we're going to build our own temple at Mount Gerizim up in Samaria. And we'll just have our own. By the way, it is there to this very day, and there are 800 Samaritans left in the world, many of them living on the top of Mount Gerizim, and they only marry their cousins, which is unfortunate for lots of reasons. But they don't. They haven't grown. It's not a very good business model, and they still have animal sacrifice, which is really gross. Yeah, right. I know, but they're nice. Other than that, they're nice people, and they make great tahini. Now, Samaritans, ain't no fight like a family fight, which means that they're not pure in the eyes of the Hebrew people. They got their own temple, and then they're not who they say they are, and they don't talk to each other. And there's a reason why Jesus shouldn't even be in Samaritan lands, because it's not safe to be there. And yet he walks across the aisle, if you will, with this woman, and he says, if you'd asked me, I'd have given you living water. Living water from Siloam? From the holy city of Jerusalem, living water to her, and not in Jerusalem, but in Samaria? Remember what we learned a minute ago. At least one time a year for the entirety of your life, you'd walk 5 days to this place just to worship God. And now Jesus is saying that this living water is everywhere, and you don't have to go anywhere to get it. Beginning to see how it works now? Water changes everything. That's just one water story. I've got another. There were 2 pools in Jerusalem. Okay, 2 major pools in Jerusalem, and especially for our purposes in the Gospel of John. Now, there were lots of pools for ritual bathing, which we're going to learn in another class. But this pool of Siloam was the pool that would meet you when you entered the city. And then this pool at the top of the Temple Mount, and you can't see it on the model there, but way on the other side of the north side of the temple wall was another pool called Bethesda. Bethesda. I've got a picture of it now. It's kind of hard to see now, but see those little steps in the middle of the 2 columns there? That's the original pool of Bethesda. What happened there is late Romans built a huge basilica over Bethesda because they were so enamored with what happened there. And oftentimes you can find holy places because you find an old church and it kind of marks where the place would have been. There's a game I like to call a get. And a get is when you can see something or touch something where something happened in the Bible. And both Siloam, the steps of Siloam, are a get because Jesus healed a blind man there in John chapter 9. And then here in John chapter 5, Jesus heals another man. Now this pool is important because this pool at the top was used for washing the animals for sacrifice. Used for washing animals for sacrifice. And so because they used it for that purpose, there arose a superstition around the water. They thought it was holy water, holier water. You know, we do this, we play a game. I call it a game because it is a holy game. We're careful with holy things. Once they've been prayed over, we believe that, you know, it's not that it's magic, it's just something holy has happened to it. So for instance, when I have a baptism, like I did yesterday morning in the church, we have that water left over. Well, we're not going to just go dump that water in the sink. I'll take it and pour it out in the grass because we've said our prayers over it, right? And I've baptized the baby with it. I mean, it's holy because the child made it holy. That's what we do. We still do the same thing. So this pool of Bethesda, was used to wash the animals for sacrifice, and so they really thought it was holy and a place of healing. Matter of fact, the superstition arose that angels would be hovering over the water, right? I can hear the brush of angels' wings, like the song we sing. They believed that angels were flying low over the water, and every once in a while, an angel's wing would crease the water, and there would be a ripple in the water. And you could, in the first person in the pool, this was the superstition, once you saw the ripple, the first person in the pool would be healed, whatever was happening. That's what they believed. Now you might recognize there was an African American hymn called "Wade in the Water." Wade, you know that, right? Right. God's going to trouble the water. That's where that comes from. Wade in the water because God's going to trouble the water. Now the Grateful Dead wrote a song called "Ripple in the Water." It's not about that. Okay, but Yeah, right. They're not every Ripple water song is about that. But wade in the water is about that, okay? Now that you know the superstition, and see, now you've got a lot of education on water in the Bible, let's look at this story. This is John chapter 5. It's on page 866 if you want to just flip a page. After this, there was a festival of the Jews. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Okay, the festival's Sukkot. This is the fall festival with water. Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. And in these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And one man who was there had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew he'd been there a long time. He said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water's stirred up. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat and walk." And once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and he walked. Okay, 2 lessons here, I think. First of all, here by the water, by this pool, Jesus sees people, even invisible people, especially invisible people. And we must see people too. I mean, that's one lesson, right? Jesus sees people, especially invisible people. We must see everyone. But how about this one? How about the question, do you want to be made well? Okay, guy had been laying there on a mat for 38 years. You think you want to be made well? Right? The guy had been laying there. It's almost like a Zacchaeus story, right? Zacchaeus, the wheel man, had climbed a tree because he was too short. He couldn't see Jesus. This guy couldn't get to the pool in time to be healed. Are you kidding me? Do you want to be made well? What kind of question is that? Well, let's think about it for a second. 38 years is a long time. You can learn to live with anything for 38 years. Sometimes you can embrace something for 38 years to the point that you've lowballed your expectations, and maybe we need to be asked the question, do you really want something better, or have you just settled? Do you really want a new life? Do you want a full life? Do you want a life with living water, or you just want some stale, skunky cistern water that you've gotten used to all this time? So now that we understand water, maybe these stories are meaning a little more to us as we live into the world of Jesus. Water brings clarity, water brings drama, water brings trust. Next Sunday, we're going to look at a much, much older story in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, but it's also just as much about water. But I want to leave us this morning with this. What does living water mean to you? And if it's offered to you, would you take it? How about this? What are our thirsts that only Jesus can quench? Amen. Hey, I've got just a second. Have y'all got a question or any questions or any clarity? Yes, sir.
Which I think I mentioned this, you talked about this before. There's a wonderful short story about Nathaniel Hawthorne called The Angel That Troubled the Water. And it's really worth reading, not long.
Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Angel That Troubled the Water. Okay. I also heard on the news yesterday that Mark Twain once said that whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. So that's something else I want you to remember when we look at water. What that means is it's a play on words, right? Water for drinking, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, which means that he who controls water has power. Water is power, especially in a world that's water stressed. I know once you see it, you can't unsee it. I hope you'll come back. Thank you guys so much.